a poem that again was studied by young Roman children. And you can figure out what will be the message here. Don't mess around with the gods, because if you do, you'll end up getting jacked, right? We have traitors, we have rapists, we have those who dared outrageous crimes, right? And what they dared, they did. And then finally at 723, she says to Aeneas, not if I had 100 tongues and 100 mouths and a voice of iron too. I could never capture all the crimes or run through all the torments doom by doom. In other words, I just can't do it. Dante will, of course, take this as his invitation to say, well, you may not be able to, but I certainly will try. And, of course, we read Dante's Inferno as the first movement of the tripartite Divine Commedia of Purgatorio and Paradiso to come later. Purgatorio we'll get to in a bit. Then the Sibyl says, let's go, press on with our journey. We're going to get this in Dante as well, where Virgil will say to Dante, let's go, we got to go, we got to go. In the famous lines, up on your feet, this is no time to tire. They get to the doors, he stakes the golden bough there. The rite complete at last, 740, or just a few lines above it. Their duty to the god is performed in full. They gained the land of joy, the fresh green fields, the fortunate groves where the blessed make their homes. Now, it's here, interestingly, that we have a shift. And the underworld now is not pictured as something terrible or scary or a place of torment, but rather now, like heaven, this notion that there's a place in the underworld where the joy and the happy get to be, right? Here, a freer air, a dazzling radiance clothes the fields, and the spirits possess their own sun, their own stars. Some flex their limbs in the grassy wrestling rings, contending in sport. We think about Book 5, right? And the competition. They grapple on the golden sands. Some beat out a dance with their feet and chant their songs. And Orpheus, the great poet, himself, the Thracian priest with his long robes, keeps their rhythm strong with his lyre 7 ringing strings, plunking it now with his fingers. In other words, this is the place where you go to feel happy, right? And we have Trojan heroes that are there, and they're working and cleaning their ponies and that kind of thing. Others, look at 760, he glimpses left and right in the meadows, feasting, singing in a joy, a chorus raised to healing Apollo, right? And he says, here are troops of men who had suffered wounds, fighting to save their country, the patriots, and those who had been pure priests while still alive. We think, of course, of the priest in the Odyssey that Odysseus chops off his head, right? Because he's not going to have any of it in Pandarus, right? He doesn't want to have anything to do with that. And the faithful poets whose songs were fit for Phobos, those who enriched our lives with the newfound arts they forged, and those we remember well for the good they did mankind. Of course, Virgil may be wanting to suggest to his Roman readers and listeners that maybe he's one of those as well. We will even have the great Attican bard Meuscus who will be there, and he's going to be asked by the Sibyl, hey, we're looking for Anchises, can we get to Anchises? He says, you bet, and he takes him there. When we meet Anchises at 790 or so, he's looking at a whole long line of future heirs who are right next to the river Lethe. And when he sees his son at 793, he says, you've come at last. Has the love your father hoped for mastered the hardship of the journey? Let me look at your face, my son, exchange some words, and hear your familiar voice. Now, if Odysseus in the Odyssey 11 goes to the underworld to meet Tiresias, Aeneas, of course, goes to see his daddy Anchises, and at the will of his father Anchises, who told him at the end of Book 5, this is what I need you to do. He says, so I dreamed. I knew you'd come. I counted the moments. My longing has not betrayed me. Over what lands, what seas have you been driven, buffeted by what perils into my open arms, my son? How I feared the realm of Libya might do you harm. Yeah, you think, in other words, because his father wasn't there, as we've already said, this foolishness with Dido unfolded, right? Your ghost, my father, he replied, your grieving ghost, so often it came and urged me to your threshold. My ships are lying moored in the Tuscan sea. Let me clasp your hand, my father. Let me, I beg you, don't withdraw from my embrace. So Aeneas pleaded, his face streaming tears. 3 times, just like Odysseus trying to hug his mother in Odyssey 11, right? 3 times he tried to fling his arms around his neck. 3 times he embraced nothing. The phantom, sifting through his fingers light as wind, quick as a dream in flight. We then are at the river Lethe. And we're told that they're like bees, all of the souls coming to the river Lethe. And it will be Aeneas who asks again, this is an instructional text, what's up with that river? That river over there. Who are they who crowd the banks, right? And now we'll get the famous myth or story of reincarnation. And the idea is that they come to the river Lethe, they drink from the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and then they're reborn again into the world. Aeneas asks what is probably an obvious question at 8:30. What, Father, can we suppose that any spirits rise from here to the world above, return once more to the shackles of the body? Why this mad desire, poor souls, for the light of life? In other words, if you're living down here, it's pretty amazing. Why would you want to go back? And the father says, I will tell you, son, not keep you in suspense. And Kaisi says, and unfolds all things in order, one by one. Now we get a very, very important passage, which will be joined to Plato's Phaedo, a text that we will be studying in a while, where Socrates gives his final words about the evidence of soul. What is it that Virgil wants his readers to know about the world? I told you that we began with those 3 strands of story, and one of those, that first strand, is the beginning of it all. What is up with this thing called living in life? Well, this is the Virgilian view. First, he says at line 837, first, the sky and the earth and the flowing fields of the sea and the shining orb of the moon and the Titan sun, the stars, an inner spirit feeds them, coursing through all their limbs. We, of course, would use the word energy, wouldn't we, today? Mind stirs the mass, and their fusion brings the world to birth, 840. From their union springs the human race, and the wild beasts, and the winged flowers, and the winged lives of birds, and the wondrous monsters bred below the glistening surface of the sea. In other words, it's the beginnings of all things, life force. The seeds of life, fiery is their force, divine their birth. But they are weighed down by their bodies' ills, or dulled by earthly limbs and flesh that's born for death. Later, when we study W.B. Yeats's classic Sailing to Byzantium, an aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. The idea that there's this body and there's this soul, and the soul wants to escape from the body, right? That is the source, he says, of all men's fears and longings, joys and sorrows. Nor can they see the heaven's light, shut up in the body's tomb, a prison dark and deep. The soul wants to escape the body. And again, when we study Sailing to Byzantium, we'll be playing this same game. True, he says, but even on that last day, when the light of life departs, death, at line 850, the wretches are not completely purged of all the taints, nor are they wholly freed of all the body's plagues. Down deep, they harden fast. They must, so long ingrained in the flesh, in strange, uncanny ways. And so the souls are drilled in punishments. They must pay for their old offenses. Of course, in Catholic theology, this will be understandings of purgatory, right? Some are hung splayed out, exposed to the empty winds. Some are plunged in the rushing floods. Their stains, their crimes scoured off, or scorched away by fire. Each of us must suffer his own demanding ghost. It's an interesting line, and a lot of people have made much of that line. Then we are sent to Elysium's broad expanse. A few of us even hold these fields of joy till the long days, a cycle of time seen through, cleanse our hard inveterate stains and leave us clear, ethereal sense, the ethereal breath of fire purged and pure. But all the rest, once they have turned the wheel of time for 1,000 years, God calls them forth to the Lethe, the river, great armies of souls, their memories blank, so that they may revisit the overarching world once more and begin to long to return to bodies yet again. We then will have, finally at 870, to finish this book, we will have what's often called the Parade of Heroes. That is to say, all of the major Romans soon to come. And of course, Anchises will say it to his son, he says, so come, the glory that will follow the sons of Troy through time, your children born of Italian stock, who wait for life, bright souls, future heirs of our name and our own renown, I will reveal them all and tell you of your fate. So this is the pivotal moment. This is why, okay, let's say it 2 ways. This is why Aeneas is in the underworld. This is why Virgil wrote this poem. This is the heart of, really, Virgil's poetic project. He wants to point out that Rome is great. Remember this poem published 1918, roughly in those 2 years, somewhere in that, probably 18 years before the birth of Christ. Virgil wants to argue there is a reason why Rome is the greatest civilization on the planet. It always will be. And he's going to use this amazing technique of having father and son standing in the underworld, looking at souls that will soon be born into the future, right? And of course that future has already come and gone for Virgil's audience. So it's going to culminate with Caesar Augustus, who is there right there at the time. And in fact, we're told that Virgil read this passage to Augustus and as well to his sister. He says it this way. He says, first of all, there's Silvanus there. He says, Silvanus at line 881 or 882, your son, your lastborn, when late in your old age your wife Lavinia brings him up deep in the woods, a king who fathers kings in turn, he founds our race that rules in Alba Longa. In other words, notice here, interestingly, it gets dropped to Aeneas. You're going to marry someone named Lavinia. And again, he's going to go out through the gate of forgetfulness at the end. So some of this he's not going to remember, and yet we, the audience, obviously will appreciate it. We've got a list at line 890 and following of the great Roman names and places. If I had time, I'd go through each of these and we could talk about how significant they are in history. I'll let you do that on your own study. Finally, we get to Romulus at line 900. Under his auspices, watch, my son, our brilliant Rome will extend her empire far and wide as the earth, her spirit high as Olympus. Within her single walls she will gird her 7 hills, blessed in her breed of men. Of course, Rome, the city of 7 hills. Now he says, turn your eyes this way, line 910, and behold these people, your own Roman people. Here is Caesar and the line of Ilias, soon to venture under the sky's great arch. Here is the man. He's here. Time and again you've heard his coming promised. Caesar Augustus, son of Agadi, will bring back the age of gold to the Latian fields where Saturn once held sway. Expand his empire past the garments and the Indians to a land beyond the stars, beyond the wheel of the year, the course of the sun itself, where Atlas bears the skies. In other words, everything is pointing in history from Aeneas to Augustus. And of course, Virgil will write this poem for Augustus. When Virgil dies, he wants this poem to be destroyed. It will be Augustus who will say, preserve the poem. And of course, we are grateful that he did so. But Augustus may have had a good reason why he wanted this poem preserved. At the conclusion of this section, he says it, that Augustus is even going to be greater than Hercules or even Bacchus. And he says it at the end at line 930, do we still flinch from turning our valor into deeds, or fear to make our home on western soil? In other words, enough with being afraid, my boy. You are going to be the father of a great nation of people, right? We have then the first kings of Rome. We have Brutus the Avenger at line 940. We have the notion of patriot's love, which wins out. And then finally he says something interesting about Julius Caesar. Battles in 953. Battles, massacres, Caesar, the bride's father, marching down from his alpine ramparts. This will be the moment when he crosses the famous river, right? And we have the beginning of the Civil War. Pompey, her husband, set to oppose him with the armies of the east. And then we get this interesting set of lines from Virgil. Know, my sons, never inure yourself to civil war. Never turn your sturdy power against your country's heart. You, Caesar, you be first in mercy. You trace your line from Olympus, line 960, born of my blood. Throw down your weapons now. And then we're told that, in fact, the Romans will jack the Greeks, the heir of Acacius, born of Achilles' warrior blood, and avenge the Trojan kin and Minerva's violated shrine. In other words, this is the irony of all ironies. In the end, the Romans are the ones who win the Trojans are the ones who win the Trojan War, because of course the Trojans ultimately become the Romans and the Romans defeat the Greeks. We then will have a third major list of all of the famous Romans, and then we get to the famous lines. This is the heart of the Aeneid. It's certainly the heart of the propedeutic, as I've been using that term. What is it that Virgil really wants to say at lines 976 to 984? He says, others, this is again Anchises the father speaking. He says, others, I have no doubt, will forge the bronze to breathe with suppler lines. In other words, there will be other nations that are better artists. Draw from the block of marble features quick with life. We're obviously thinking about the Greeks here, right? Plead their cases better. Chart with their rods the stars that climb the sky and foretell the times they arise. There are going to be other cultures that are better with words and better with science. But you, Roman, remember, rule with all your power the peoples of the earth. These will be your arts, to put your stamp on the works and ways of peace, to spare the defeated, break the proud in war. And this is, of course, the challenge that the Romans will hear from the moment these lines are written. What makes Rome great? Two things. They spare the defeated, and they break the proud in war. That is to say, law and force that's going to back up that law. That's what makes Rome great. We then will have Marcellus and the comment that he will mow down the Carthaginians at line 990. In other words, Dido's curse or her wish won't happen because, of course, of the Punic Wars. And then Aeneas will ask, who is that young man walking next to Marcellus' side there? It's a mournful shadow, right? A mournful shadow flutters black as the night. At line 1000, my son, his tears brimming, father Anchises started in. Don't press to know your people's awesome grief. Only a glimpse of him we're told. And then at line 10:10, mourn for his virtue, mourn for his honor forged of old, his sword arm never conquered in battle. This is Augustus's young nephew, by the way, and Marcellus. And we are told that as Virgil was reciting the set of lines, that the poor young man's mother fainted, which is a great story. I don't know if it's, it may be. I mean, no enemy could ever go against him in arms and leave unscathed, whether he fought on foot or rode on horseback, digging spurs in his charger's lathered flanks. We think, obviously, of Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, don't we? Oh, child of heartbreak, if only you could burst the stern decrees of fate. You will be Marcellus. Fill my arms with lilies. Let me scatter flowers, lustrous roses, piling high these gifts at least on our descendants' shade, and perform a funeral rite. And we're told, so they wander over the endless fields of air, gazing at every region, viewing realm by realm. Once Anchises had led his son through each new scene and fired his soul with a love of glory still to come. And that, I think, is important, that notion of this is what great works of literature are supposed to do. Virgil is telling us this is what great poems are supposed to do. They're supposed to fire the soul with a love of glory still to come. The idea, look, you got a reason now to stay alive. He tells him next of the wars Aeneas must wage. He tells him of the Latinian peoples, tells of Latinius' city, and how he should shun or shoulder each ordeal that he must meet. In other words, he gives him instructions. And then the end. It's kind of abrupt. There are twin gates of sleep. One they call the gate of Horn, and it offers easy passage to all true shades. This will take us, of course, back to the Odyssey at book 19. You'll maybe remember that Penelope said something similar about the two gates of dreams at line 634 to 638. One is the gate of Horn. It offers easy passage to all true shades. The other glistens with ivory, radiant, flawless, but through it the dead send false dreams up toward the sky. Some have called this the gate of forgetfulness. Here, Anchises, his vision told in full, escorts his son and Sibyl both and shows them out now through the gate, the ivory gate. And there's been much made of this. Like, why would they go through that ivory gate, that sends dead false dreams up toward the sky? And a lot has been said about this. I think it's as simple as this. There's a whole lot of what Aeneas has been shown he's going to forget, and he will have to reclaim or rediscover. I mean, if you jump ahead to book 8, line 855, you're going to see this line that says, Aeneas knows nothing of these events, which gives us some sense. He should, if he can remember what's going on. We're finally told Aeneas cuts his way to the waiting ships to see his crews again and sets his course straight on. And this story will continue then in Latium in book 7. All right, let's quickly now jump to levels 2 and 3. Well, 2a. In the end, of course, this argument is life is fair. We all get what we deserve, right? It just might take a little time before. In other words, in death, in afterlife, there is a certain understanding of due diligence, due justice, and all of that, right? Another major message is in Dido not forgiving Aeneas even in death. There are some things that you just can't ever forgive, and Dido is a classic example of that, the jilted lover who will never forgive. Another major message, of course, is that the Roman people, I mean, think about this, the Roman people are actually greater than the Greeks, even though the Greeks produced this amazing work of art, these works of art, because the Roman people will give the world law and the importance of law. It's an interesting idea to ask, what makes Rome great is what makes Europe, France, and England great, Germany, is what makes America great, and it's that notion of law. Or to go back in our Chinese study of history to the Confucian notion of law, right? Is it true that law and the willingness to obey the laws is what makes civilization possible? It's an interesting idea. Finally, and we're for sure supposed to see this, patriotism is born through these great stories. It's why Virgil is writing this. And of course, the young man Marcellus at the very end, who is so highlighted, is a classic example of why you should be a patriot, right? At level 2B, the symbolism here, well, the Aeneid itself is obviously a symbol, a text for education, right? And for how one should live one's life well. Tartarus, obviously, is the symbol of punishment. The Elysian is the fields of joy. That is the symbol of heaven or relief or peace. The irony in 2B is that Aeneas will forget much of what he's been shown here. And of course, as well, the other irony is that in the end, Virgil will write this poem to prove that Troy was actually won. They actually won the Trojan War, even though the city was itself destroyed, because ultimately the Romans defeated the Greeks. At 3A, well, we've mentioned the Iliad already, and the ghost of Patroclus in Book 23, I Need You to Bury Me. The Odyssey, Book 11, we have similarities, obviously. Both heroes go into the underworld, but we have some major differences. The motivations, some of the reasons for them being down there, but most importantly, this is really far more educational for Aeneas than it is for Odysseus. Odysseus just needs to know how he's going to get back home. Ironically, think of it, Aeneas is already at his new home. He is in Italy now. He just doesn't know it yet. But this is really instructional, not just to Aeneas, but instructional to every Roman to follow, right? And ultimately, St. Augustine, who was raised as a schoolboy on this text, when he comes to write his famous City of God, he has in mind these passages that will celebrate the great city of Rome. The Aeneid, of course, we would say at 3A, has all led to this moment, and then from this moment, everything kind of continues and goes on. Really, the end of the Aeneid now, for most readers, is just going to be a culmination of a whole bunch of wars that ultimately begin the process that Anchises was showing